Good afternoon, everyone. This is Eric Seleznow with JFF on the line in Washington, D.C., where we're having a rainstorm and tornado warnings. But I'd like to thank you for joining us today for today's webinar, Modernizing California's Apprenticeship System for the Economy of Today and Tomorrow. I'm Eric Seleznow with JFF Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, and we will tell you a little bit about those things in a while, but our goal today really is to spend some time with some officials and friends and colleagues in California to discuss our recent report on the Future of Apprenticeship in California, which examines California's current apprenticeship system, how modernization could create a more secure economic future for residents and businesses alike, and what initial steps are needed to move forward. And a lot of this work was generated out of some of the ideas and some of the work we've seen in California, and why we did this report. So we'll get to that shortly. So Rachel's joining me today. Rachel, next slide, please. I'm Eric Seleznow. Hello, terrible picture of me, but I lead our Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning. And you're going to be meeting some other of our colleagues over the course of today, and you'll be hearing from folks who will join me shortly, Vinz Koller with SPR, John Dunn with the State of California, Fran Kennedy with JFF in our Oakland office, and finally a couple of employer representatives, Fernandez from SAP and Rebecca Hanson from the Education Fund. So we'll go through this as efficiently as we can, as quickly as we can, to make sure we're getting kernels and nuggets of information that will be helpful to you as we talk about the report. Next slide, please. So JFF, we're headquartered in Boston. We have offices in D.C., which is where we are today. Well, where I am today. Fran is in Oakland, and we have offices out in Oakland, California. So it's great to be working all three of those places, but we work nationally. JFF works nationally at the intersection of workforce education and training, and we work with career pathways for grades 9 through 14. We have our Center for Apprenticeship. We work with community colleges, workforce organizations, and we work probably in most states somewhere doing some sort of work. We've been around for 35 years doing this work. Next slide, please. And so we represent the Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, which is the center we launched about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, to try to provide information, resources, TA for the field, sort of a one-stop place to go for a lot of things, apprenticeship and work-based learning. I lead that center, and I'm joined by a number of good folks who are on the call today and throughout our organization. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spend the first few minutes talking to Vinz Koller with Social Policy Research, John Dunn with California Labor and Workforce Agency, and then I'm going to turn it over to Fran to have a deeper dive conversation with the employers. And towards the end of this, we're going to open this up for Q&A. In the interim, if you want to send a question with your chat button, we'll try to get to that either as we go through this or save that towards the end. So audience members, we have a whole lot of you folks in California that are on or signing on. We encourage you to send questions our way. We'll get to as many as we can over the course of today. All right, so let's get started. Enough of that, and let's talk a little bit about why JFF was interested in having this report done in California. Actually, we had another partner in this, Fran can tell us a little bit about later, but you know, I have been involved with apprenticeship intensely the last 5 years. I've also worked at the local level, the state level. I was at the federal level working for the Department of Labor and actively involved in apprenticeship. And when it came to JFF and stood up the center, we started really looking at what's going all across the country. What are states doing? What are counties and cities doing? Where are the investments in apprenticeship? Where's some of the innovation going on? And I kept, hearing about California and hearing about grant programs that came out, or this program here, or that program there, and made a couple of trips out to California, got to meet some people and see some programs. I was really impressed with some of the activity going on at the state level. You know, we're still early in this country in a major transformation of apprenticeship. This country's really only been focused on it for the last 4 years. Obama administration had a major focus on it. It's continued with the Trump administration. There's been incredible bipartisan federal investment. States and locals are getting involved. So it's been really interesting to see that. But there really wasn't much national information about what was going on in California. And so we wanted to try to capture some of that work and partnered with our friends at Social Policy Research Associates to try to capture, since they're on the ground in California, to try to capture that. And we wanted to learn a little bit more about the current strengths and limitations in the system in California, key features of apprenticeship, and recommendations for policymakers. And as you all know, you had a recent election last fall, and you have a new governor coming in, so we thought the timing of the report, which was released around first week of December, would be helpful for policymakers as they were thinking about apprenticeship. So next slide, please. So that was our interest in getting this report done. I believe it was the report that's got the most hit on our website since we've been doing this, which was interesting. And, we certainly got a big sign up for this webinar. So a lot of interest in what's going on in California, and we think there's some interesting things going on. So today, I want to welcome Vinz Koller, Senior Strategist for Social Policy Research. And as you can see, Vinz does a lot of training in TA. He's got an interest and passion for apprenticeship, particularly youth apprenticeship, and a number of activities you can see up on the screen. So Vinz, can you hear me? And welcome to the webinar today. Until Vinz can get back on, let me move over to John Dunn. John, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So let's go to John, and we'll circle back to Vinz in a few minutes. John, you were at the state level of the Assistant Secretary. You're the Assistant Secretary for Apprenticeship and Worker Training. You've been actively involved in workforce for many years, community colleges. You're with the Labor and Workforce Agency now. Thanks for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about the Future of Work Commission that the governor's got going on, and then I want to ask you a little bit about employers.
Okay, yeah. I think it was a week and a half ago the governor announced the Future of Work Commission, and I encourage people to go read the executive order. It outlines a lot of the overall goals of the administration, but I pulled a couple things out of it today when I went back and looked at it. And the primary mission of that commission is, and I'll kind of read it here, study, understand, analyze, and make recommendations around the types of jobs Californians may have in the next several decades as technology changes and the economy changes. And they're tasked with looking for ways to preserve good jobs, prepare the workforce for future jobs through lifelong learning. That was something that jumped out at me in the executive order, and that's something that I really believe an apprenticeship can provide, that model of learning and training that promotes a continuous learning cycle and really gives people the foundation and the ability to adapt to new and emerging technologies throughout the course of their lifetime, because they're going to have to. And I think apprenticeship is contextualized, it's real, and that's what I think we're missing in a lot of our training and education these days. So I think the Future Work Commission is going to address on an overall scale, their mission, but a lot of it points right at apprenticeship, and it's mentioned in the executive action too.
So John, the good news is, right, that there's I assume there's some pretty high-level California policymakers on that commission, and so apprenticeship is a conversation that's happening with policymakers from a lot of different disciplines and walks of life in California. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, they haven't put together the names on it. There's going to be 14 to 18 members, and I've been real quick to see what that. Julie Sue, our new labor secretary, and Lenny Mendonça, the governor's chief economic advisor, will be, intimately involved in this commission and helping to put it together. So as soon as they get some names put in, we'll know more. But I'm sure that it's going to be some heavy hitters on the policy and employer side too. Okay, great.
Go to the next slide, please. This expansion of apprenticeships has been going on in California. There's been some interesting funding streams through community colleges and elsewhere through the state, through community colleges and elsewhere to drive apprenticeship. We'll be hearing from a couple of employers in a couple of minutes, but, John, you travel the state a lot. Are employers sort of understanding apprenticeships? I know there's some growth going on. Is it still an uphill battle, or do you think there's a fair amount of good communication going on with employers to expand, and what are you hearing from the business community?
I think, and Lauren can speak to this, and I know Rebecca can too in the healthcare area, it's a lot better than it was 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. We have, through the California Apprenticeship Initiative and a lot of the work that has been done in the last 2 to 3 years, it's more, employers are hearing more about it. They're hearing more positive things about it. And the employers that have decided to jump in and take advantage of apprenticeship and participate are positive. I haven't heard a negative one yet. The employers that are still kind of looking at it and trying to figure it out and see how it fits with their business model, it's a better conversation than we've had in the past. I hear from employers at different events that they're much more interested in learning more. In the past, it was a much more uphill battle, but I think we keep pounding away and we keep pointing to the successes that we have. When Gallo Wines and SAP and some of the big healthcare programs get on board, that's something that's a much easier sell. So
yeah, well, and we know it's always I won't say an uphill battle, but it is a bit of a challenge to get employers to break through the myth and misperceptions about apprenticeship. So they can fully understand and make good decisions. And I particularly think so in the tightening labor market that apprenticeship is more important than ever to put people on pathways to good skills and meet the needs of the employers. The other thing is that any employer I've ever met who's done an apprenticeship program is never sorry they did it. They're always very happy they did it and pleased with the results and the return on their energy and investment. Can you go to the next slide, please, Rachel? Thank you much. So look, there's a lot of talk across the country about youth apprenticeship. I think we know that in California, and the report cites this, the average age I think is 28 for an apprentice. The average age in some of the European countries that do apprenticeship are 16 and 17. It's a very different high school model. There's a lot of emerging activity going on in the high school-based apprenticeship world. What is California thinking about youth apprenticeships and where they're going to go with high school-based apprenticeships in the future?
Well, there's a huge interest in this, and we've been kind of incubating and supporting and fertilizing, I guess, adding lots of water. We've had a lot of rain this year, so there's been plenty of water. Wherever we could get some traction for youth apprenticeships. So probably almost 2 years ago, I first had a conversation with the San Bernardino Unified superintendent about that. San Bernardino and the Inland Empire has some of the highest youth unemployment in the state and perhaps the nation. We've got some great locations around the state. The Inland Empire through Norco College, San Bernardino, Riverside Unified. Very good meeting there last week that Brent Barton from New America helped facilitate. City of San Francisco through Josh Arce and the Mayor's Office on Economic Development are looking very closely at this also, as well as Sacramento, San Joaquin County, and some folks in Los Angeles too. So we're going to keep supporting those areas and those pockets. We're participating in the PIA group that JFF is, the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. And the 500,000 number seems really big in terms of the governor's goals, but when you think about we graduate 425,000 high school students every year, that's a big number. And that's not even counting the kids that don't graduate or end up taking a couple extra years to finish up. So there's a lot of people entering the workforce every June that I think we should target a lot of that for potential youth apprenticeships and to help drive education.
Great. All right. Well, great. John, thank you. We're going to move to Vinz Koller. Hopefully he's on the line. Vince, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Fabulous.
All right. Wow.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We're Social Policy Research Associates. And again, Vince has a passion for apprenticeship, and particularly youth apprenticeship. And, we're going to go back to setting the stage for the report that we asked Vince to do. And go to the next slide, please, Rachel. And Vince, Vince, our time's going to be a little bit short in here, but, just what did you learn during the report? What were some of the highlights? And we'll get to the recommendations and thinking around that in a little bit. But just what did you learn? You're pretty active in California apprenticeship circles. So what did you learn doing this report and talking to all the people that you talked about?
Well, as you can see in the graph, the trend lines in apprenticeship are going upwards. Under the previous governor, and John mentioned this, there was a goal set to kind of double the number of apprenticeships by a few years from now, really, at 126,000, and the state is well on track to do that. And as we also just heard from John, the new governor, and you had mentioned this, kind of in a moonshot move, said let's increase the goal to a multifold increase, and it's a reasonable goal if you look at the capacity of our economy. This is the fifth largest economy in the world. The available middle-skilled jobs that are sort of ideal for apprenticeship are estimated to be between 500 and 800,000 trainee positions. So that 500,000 number is not unreasonable. And it's the kind of growth, it's the kind of growth that we haven't seen, and frankly, we cannot achieve without scaling how we launch apprenticeships and how we connect people to apprenticeships, both mid-career changers as well as youth who are just launching their careers. Mm-hmm. The distribution of industries and occupations where most apprenticeships occur is kind of a tale of two trends. If you go to the next, the next couple of slides just show where the trend line goes. That red line is basically what the new governor said, this is where we're headed. So the next slide will actually show you it's off the chart. So the goal is off the chart, literally. But if we go to the next slide, you'll see where we currently are in terms of the distribution of where active apprentices are by industry. And you can see that the majority are still in kind of the trades, which are tried and true users of apprenticeship. And also firefighting in California is a big industry that uses apprenticeship, correctional systems. And there's a new trend, there's a new initiative. You alluded to it at the beginning, the California Apprenticeship Initiative, as well as some new pilots through the American Apprenticeship Initiative, where we see a diversification in industries and occupations. The numbers are still small, but these are test cycles to see how would we do this in small numbers. Now we kind of have to look at what does it take to scale it up.
Right. And I think when you look at, Vince, what is interesting with that graphic up there now is, and I think that's somewhat true of national numbers, and that is, look, the building trades have been doing this for 100 years, actually 81 years officially, but they've been doing it for a while. And it's not surprising that they have more than numbers, but the other new programs being developed in healthcare, NIT, manufacturing, cyber, are growing. And so while those numbers of apprentices are large, those new programs are growing as well. Great.
Absolutely.
Other things you discovered along the way, or your team has discovered along the way. I know we spent some time in the report talking about youth apprenticeship as well, so maybe we can get to that.
Yeah, a couple of recommendations that are directly related to, say, a serious scaling up. So even to double, but especially to kind of increase the number of slots by multiples, kind of requires a shift in approach of how apprenticeships are launched. They can't be done on a company-by-company basis anymore. It requires really an occupational approach and an industry approach, where industry sectors band together in deciding what competencies they would like to see for each apprenticeable occupations, that then the curriculum is clearly described, what is in the classroom, what is work-based. And as John just mentioned, California took an important step in that direction, and now is, allowing competency-based apprenticeships, which is a big step. And then, now this is the big next step. If you really want to get to 500,000, you can't really do that without implementing a comprehensive youth apprenticeship system. And the reason we need such a system is that the trend in industry is clear that post-secondary education is a requirement for a well-paying job. But we also know that even though for a couple of decades we've told every youth that the only way to get there is kind of an academic-only path, that, our success in that way is not great. Not everyone's making it. And so now we have another arrow in our quiver, really. Apprenticeship has tremendous potential in getting young people ready for college and a career at the same time, really at a fraction of the cost to themselves and to the economy. And my report goes into some detail about what is required to do that, to make it happen. Really the adoption of a dual education system similar to what is currently being done in Colorado, in Washington State, and, in many leading economies, and especially innovation economies around the world. And California is an innovation economy. It is a bellwether state. It is, when we talk about future of work, California is the future is now. So these issues are particularly pressing here. And maybe if we go to the next slide, I don't know, we can talk about this either as far as the challenges are concerned or sort of where we see the future. I don't know where you'd like me to head.
Well, a couple of things. We're getting a couple of questions. I just want to hit them real quick, Vinz, with you while we still got you here. So on your previous graphic, you had a circle with others on there.
Right.
And I just want to know, is that the catch-all for a lot of other independent programs? I know we have growth in IT, healthcare, and manufacturing. What are those 7,000 and others? Are those everything from tool and die making to auto mechanic to others?
Right, yeah, and there's some very innovative and interesting programs, cybersecurity, childcare, horticulture. There's a whole, manufacturing, logistics, transportation logistics, bus drivers and bus mechanics. There's a whole range of both public and private sector employment where apprenticeship is being now seen as kind of a new way to have employers be co-creators of talent and not just consumers of talent. Because the paradox, and this is what I didn't get to say at the beginning, but the paradox that we see in a high employment, low unemployment economy is that we're still seeing people not connecting. So we have a huge demand for talent, hundreds of thousands of jobs unfilled, and at the same time, hundreds of thousands of people not connecting to those jobs. And that's kind of this particular dilemma where I think apprenticeship can really make a difference.
Yeah. There's another interesting question, Vinz, that just came up, and we'll get back to your presentation in a minute, but it's a really good question, and that is, and John, to your point about the future work and the Governor's Commission and all these conversations about the future work, and basically this person's question is, employers haven't figured it out themselves. How do we figure it out with apprentices, if I'm summarizing the question right? And it's a good point, right? I mean, we are in a period of transition. There's this whole artificial intelligence thing going on. We're not sure how it's going to play out in companies. My view of this and the way I've sort of addressing it now is whatever change and transformation is going in a company driven by technology, apprenticeship is part of the solution for that. We're not sure what they're going to be yet, but companies that are changing will certainly add that into their curriculum, add that into their work-based learning, and should be using it once they figure it out, but they may not figure it out yet. Just wonder if you have any quick thoughts on that before we move.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the one major point I make in the report is that through apprenticeship, the future becomes the present, right? One of the intriguing things about apprenticeship is we've been asking educators to predict what the skills are that will be needed 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And let's face it, nobody knows. So the only known constant is that we don't know. But in an apprenticeship setting, the future is now. The workplace is the workplace. The workplace will continue to evolve. And if we transfer some of that training into the workplace, then people who are in the work setting and work-based learning are actually getting ready for the future in real time along with the employers. So if employers are not ready, then they're out of business, right? And so that's why I think apprenticeship is particularly suited for a rapid cycle innovating economy like a good part of California's economy.
Great. So, Vinz, let's move just to the fine because we got to move on. I've taken too many questions. I'm told I'm getting kicked under the table. can we get to the recommendation? Really, what is the bottom line of this report that you did? What did we say? I mean, I know some of it was, support the governor's goal, but where are we with the recommendations? Strengthen intermediaries, focus on youth. Where do we direct people to?
I think it's a range of things. I mean, I think it is, I would say, if we are serious about implementing a youth system, which again, if you want those numbers, you kind of have to do that, then it is really about implementing a dual vocational education system. The next slide shows what that could look like for California. The lower half is the current system. It's maybe a little hard to read on people's computer screen. A single track that leads people through high school to higher learning, post-secondary education, and the green side is they get employed. The dual vocational pathway that California is, again, just like Colorado and other states are looking at, is really an opportunity in 10th and 11th or 11th and 12th grade for students to have a choice and say, I can now go into a 50% work-based learning, 50% classroom-based learning. I could graduate from high school both with a certificate and some college credit, and maybe in one more year I would have an associate with a certificate in the trade or in the particular profession that I've trained in. That would be this dual vocational education system. We have all the pieces in place in California to make that happen. We have solid community college systems. We have what I would call, professional educational institutions of higher learning, like the California State University system. We obviously have the academic institutions that have a great reputation. What we don't have is a well-articulated system where pathways are clear and transparent to those who actually need to see them, nor are they very clear to employers. So employers will say, it's kind of hard to figure out how I do this. And that's, I think, where we have to get to. It's kind of reduce complexity both for employers and for job seekers and for youth. Not an easy system, not an easy thing to do in California. It's a big state. It's a complex state. Jurisdictional overlaps happen. But the potential and the payoff, as I think the report demonstrates, are really quite tremendous.
Awesome. Thank you. Vinz, thank you. And investments, policies, having legislators know about it and seeing your programs, having the governor involved in it, having good people through the state agencies and like John Dunn and Eric Root at the State Apprenticeship Agency are all very helpful. So there's a link to the report somewhere in the materials that we sent you, so please feel free to look at the report and see some of the insights in there. We need to move across the country because I'm getting kicked under the table for time, and I'm going to introduce Fran Kennedy. Fran's been around the workforce system for a while in California, and she works on a number of issues here at JFF, sector work, business partnerships, employers and industry involvement, and I'm going to turn over the next part of the conversation to Fran Kennedy and our director. She's director of in our JFF Oakland office. Fran?
Great. Thank you, Eric, and thanks to everyone for joining and staying with us during the tornado. That's kind of interesting, right? And thanks, John and Vinz, for all that you're doing in California to advance apprenticeship. So we'll shift quickly over to our next panelist, who are part of the employer discussion, and they come to us with great experience and a lot of knowledge, and we only have about 15 minutes or so to tap some of that. So I would like to introduce, and hopefully they're still on, we have Lauren Fernandez, who is the Senior Learning and Development Manager at SAP, and we have Rebecca Hanson, Executive Director at the Education Fund. So Lauren and Rebecca, are you on with us?
Yes, I'm here. This is Lauren.
Hi, Rebecca. Make sure we have Rebecca.
Yep, I'm here. It's Rebecca. Do you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, we can. Thank you. So what we have is about 15 minutes, and I'll ask you a few questions. We have some slides that may come up, and those questions we may touch on them or not. And for those that are listening today, we can always get you back some of this information since we're just kind of touching down just a bit, but there's such great depth with our guests here, so we can always circle back with you and make sure you get the resources and information that we shared today. So first, I'd like to ask Lauren and Rebecca to just share a little bit about their role in expanding apprenticeship in California. And then what I'll do is go in and ask a couple deeper questions about the employer engagement and some of the models that and approaches that they're using and seeing advanced in our state. So if we could, Lauren, can you share just a brief background of what you're doing and why you're doing it?
Sure, of course. So I work at SAP in Silicon Valley, and I started working on apprenticeship about a year ago. And we were seeing a huge need for us to really look at our recruiting process, in particular around bringing more diverse candidates in. Right now, for our job roles, we have a 4-year university degree being the bare minimum requirement for entry-level jobs. However, that was leaving out a huge talent pool for us, in particular, a huge local talent pool. So we looked at different options, and that's where we learned about apprenticeship, in particular in California, and we heard some of our other tech peers in Silicon Valley also piloting apprenticeship programs, and that's how we got involved.
Great. And how about, Rebecca, can you share a little bit about your role and what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Rebecca Hanson, and we do work with multiple employers, 17 different employers in the healthcare industry, mostly private sector, but we're actually a labor management training fund. So we are partnered with 6 different SEIU locals. We serve 100,000 healthcare workers on the West Coast, the majority of them in California. We've been working on apprenticeship programs since 2015, and for a long time, and I think this is true for most healthcare employers, like we've been doing earn and learn programs for a long time and really moving that into registered apprenticeships in 2015. Just building on the point made, I think, by Eric earlier, the circumstances in the labor market currently are that there is a shortage of skilled workers, and so this is the great time to be kind of engaging in how are we solving for the shortage both of skilled workers and of workers with experience through this formalized training program. So I think the slide that popped up is some of the background research that's really driving our work. I just will highlight that we're working with an incumbent workforce that's really diverse. It's 80% women, 70% people of color, a large number are English language learners. We know that for many of them, they're supporting or have a primary wage that supports a family. And so without providing these kind of pathways, they have very little opportunity to move up. And so we're really focused on the fact that there are currently a lack of upward mobility. And as we think about how work is changing and technology impacts healthcare, like every industry, we know that we need people to continue to do that lifelong learning. So we've been partnered nationally through something called the National Center for Healthcare Apprenticeships with other SEIU training funds that support over 650 different employers nationally in healthcare, and through those partnerships, we've registered over 900 apprentices in healthcare in 11 occupations, and we're really focused on where are the scale needs in our industry and how do we continue to build and support these programs so, to Vince's point, they can begin to scale across to meet the demand for future healthcare workforce.
Perfect. Yeah, that's exciting, and it's important work, and you've been just a champion, so thank you. And to both of you then, what are the promising shifts that you're seeing in California right now in advancing apprenticeships? And I'll go to you, Lauren, and then maybe Rebecca, if you want to kind of come in on that as well. Just curious what you're seeing as a shift and systems change.
Sure. So when we started working on apprenticeship at SAP last spring, we hosted an apprenticeship summit in August at our Palo Alto campus. And we had over 100 people participating. We had over 33 Silicon Valley tech companies that were there to participate in the conversation. And I think right there for us, that was an exciting time to really move the dial and bring even more of our tech peers participating in the conversation. So after our apprenticeship summit in August, we decided to build out an apprenticeship consortium, which is all tech companies are participating in this consortium in Silicon Valley that are currently working on an apprenticeship program, whether it's small, large. All of us are at different stages in our apprenticeship journey, and with this momentum from the consortium, we're really seeing, just by word of mouth from other tech companies, joining the conversation and wanting to learn more, because all of us, it's not a sustainable model for us to be pulling from the same talent pool if we're not actively developing that local talent pool. So we can't just act as consumers, but we also have to take a very active role in developing local talent that we have here in the Bay Area.
Great. Rebecca, do you want to also answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think like others, we have definitely seen an increasing interest from employers in these programs. You know, I think initially a lot of people are like, oh, people in healthcare will never like the word apprenticeship. Like, I feel like people get over that and are over that, right? And that there's a lot of interest in many of the meetings I go to with healthcare industry employers and leaders. Like, folks are talking actively about apprenticeship, both from the union side and from the employer side, to think about how are we building apprenticeships to deal with our most critical workforce needs, and how are we sort of partnered in doing that. And part of the reason for that, I think, is also because workplaces are experiencing tremendous change. They not only need to fill open jobs, but they also need to really capture the experience and learning that exists within the current workforce. And so it's a way for a labor management partnership to really contribute to building the work-based training infrastructure that both continues to develop the current workforce, but also transfers knowledge of folks who are maybe getting close to retirement but have some key skills and experience that can be used in precepting incoming folks. So I think that there's just a promising kind of shift in healthcare of an acknowledgement of the opportunity to do change management through work-based learning that can be an apprenticeship that focuses on moving people up a job ladder.
Great. And maybe just to add to that, can you speak a little bit about opportunities? And you mentioned diversity. What about the opportunities that you're seeing for English language learners and other entry points to where we're encompassing all the populations that we serve in our communities? And that could go to Rebecca and Lauren.
This is Rebecca. I will just add that we have seen that we had a grant from the state of California called the High Road Training Partnership Grant, and we leveraged that grant to work on building a pre-apprenticeship program focused on English language learners and creating training related to language acquisition that is tied to career advancement and enrollment into an apprenticeship program. I think we see an opportunity to tie sort of skills development for entry-level workers into ongoing career advancement into, through apprenticeship. And another thing we know is that there's a huge need to diversify the patient care workforce at every level, and there's a lack of diversity and inclusion at the higher level occupations, and so there's a real opportunity to use programs like this to focus on getting some of the language diversity and cultural diversity into higher levels of patient care, and apprenticeship is a fantastic way to address that need.
Great. And Lauren, are you there? I wasn't sure if we lost you there. Did you want to add to that?
I'm here. I don't have anything else to add. I think Rebecca covered some of my points that I was going to make as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, and a question to both of you. What do you see as the employer's role in creating a statewide apprenticeship system? Or are we talking about a system, and do we want to talk about the shift even there with what employers are doing to make this successful, sustainable, and move forward? And Rebecca or Lauren, either you can jump in on that.
Sure. I think from the employer's perspective, our role is crucial. I think that, when we look at the future of work, and just running the numbers from the SAP side of the house and looking at how many technical roles we have open versus, you know, again, just keeping that closed mindset of how many people have a 4-year university degree coming from a technical degree. We will not, if we only look at 4-year university degrees, we will not have enough talent to fill our jobs and stop in the future. So I think apprenticeship is hugely crucial for all of us employers when we look at our recruiting process, when we look at being able to sustain as a business and be able to effectively fill our roles. I think also when it comes to the education piece, us as employers need to be able to inform the curriculum as well. We need to be able to better partner with all of our educational institutions to make sure that what is being taught, whether it's through apprenticeship or at community college or even 4-year university degrees, is relevant to our industries. So I think we play a huge, crucial role and a key piece of moving apprenticeship forward.
Yeah, I'll just agree with Lauren that I think the employer is really key in both identifying the jobs and helping plan for the future need for jobs, because there is a pipeline, right? Some of the occupations that we train for take several years, and so getting those commitments to job placement and sort of a future outlook of where their demand is going to be, as well as, to Lauren's point, really helping inform what people are being prepared to do, what the training is. I think, you know, Vince or Eric just mentioned how making the training about the current job and helping create the lifelong learner who will be prepared as the job continues to change in the future is really an essential input from both work-based learning and from the employer leadership of that. I'll say that in healthcare, I think that many jobs require experience, and so the employer has a key role in helping to provide trainee positions or apprenticeship positions and you know, positions for new grads. And that apprenticeship gives us a way to really organize and deliver quality work-based learning that helps people get up to speed and be successful in those roles. I think there's a huge opportunity right now that we're exploring with many of our employers around doing that more systematically, and because there's a lot of clinical placements that are already happening and training that happens sort of on the fly, but I think the opportunity to be less fragmented and higher quality in how we deliver clinical opportunities for healthcare workers it's a huge opportunity. It'll benefit all employers.
That's great. Thank you. I wish we had so much more time to just dive into a lot of these questions, but we're somewhat at our limit here. I'll ask one more question and then we'll shift over to some Q&As. And of course, again, we'll always follow up with those online that would like additional information from our speakers. So just to maybe wrap it up with the two of you, which again, thank you so much. You're just an amazing wealth of talent and experience. You both sit on California's Interagency Advisory Committee. The reason I think this is important to bring up is because in California, as we all know, we have two types of ways to go about apprenticeship, but they're aligning really well together. But there's a lot of areas that we have to work on to ensure that we're informing each other, traditional and non-traditional, to ensure we advance our apprenticeship. So can you share what that role on those advisory committees mean to both of you, and maybe just quickly the importance of that committee for the state? And Rebecca or Lauren can go either way.
This is Lauren. I think for me, having a key tech company participate in this interagency advisory committee, I think it's hugely important. It's for us from the tech industry side, it's us putting a stake in the ground to say we are committed to this movement, and not just to Silicon Valley, but across the state of California. So some of my other tech peers have reached out and said how can we get involved, or how do we push apprenticeship forward, and even down, all the way to San Diego as well. So I think for us, it's just the visibility to say tech apprenticeships are coming. A lot of tech companies have already jumped on board. Others are still hesitant. So I think for us, it's just that initial start of a really, really good movement for apprenticeship in the tech industry.
Great.
And this is Rebecca, and I would echo Lauren's thoughts in relationship to the healthcare industry, and just add that I actually represent labor on the committee, and I think one of the opportunities we have is to really set high quality in terms of the outcomes of non-traditional apprenticeships in creating middle-class jobs and union jobs, and supporting really those high-road employers in California who are really investing in, increasing opportunities for Californians, and even, back to Vince's point, into folks entering the labor market and having ongoing career path opportunities for them with stackable credentials. I just think that we really need it as a state with a really high cost of living and a high poverty rate. There's so much opportunity to improve on the current training infrastructure in healthcare, and just creating clear opportunities and ongoing development that will really serve both to improve lives of workers, but actually in healthcare, improve lives of patients too.
Right. Well, thank you both. And again, this was a quick touch, but we certainly know we're partners in this, so we will be back to this conversation and other conversations around the table, meetings, webinars. We'll keep going on this. So thank you both, and I'm going to turn this back over to Eric. And Eric, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Fran. And, we ticked through a lot of time here, but we're going to try to get a couple of questions in. And we've got, I really appreciate Lauren and Rebecca's insights, apprenticeship, labor, non-labor, IT, healthcare, building trades, cyber, adult youth. It really is an application, I think, whose time has come or is coming, and people are getting smarter about its use. As I said earlier, we're still early in the national transition on these things. But we've got a lot of questions that came in, sort of a lot of technical on-the-ground questions, and I'm not going to answer each and every one because we've got many of them, but I would want to refer you to the Department of Apprenticeship Services. They've got outreach and navigation people who can help answer some of your specific questions about if you want to put a program together, who should you speak with and what you should do. I was particularly impressed hearing about some of the California work, John, with sort of building, or Vinz, or one of you talked about building on some of the sector strategy work that I know has been going on in California. Apprenticeship is not the solution for every workforce problem, but certainly when it is, it can be very powerful, but it is a solution for some, and that sector approach is very good. Lauren, there was some questions about you're doing something new and important in IT. Who's your training provider? And just in a few seconds, what sort of curriculum do you use? Is it a general curriculum, very specific? And who does the training for you?
Yeah, great question. So we partnered with Apprenti. We at SAP are not in-house experts necessarily on apprenticeship program administration. So we've partnered with Apprenti, and our apprenticeship that we're building is a UX UI apprenticeship, which is a really crucial role for us here in working at a software company. And our training provider is General Assembly. So they're out of San Francisco, and they have a really, really good comprehensive UX training program. That's
great. Thank you. And Apprenti is a national intermediary who does work in the IT apprenticeship space. Thanks, Lauren. And John, if you're still on, which I hope you are, so there's a lot of interest in youth apprenticeship across the country. And one of the things that always comes up is, oh my goodness, if you're under 18, you can't work, or if you're 16 or 17, you can't be near heavy equipment or lift patients or things like that. Some of that is an exaggeration, some of it's a myth, some of it's accurate, depending upon where you are. Is that something California is looking at, any adjustment to labor? I know there's some states out there that if you're a high school apprentice, you can work them at 16 and 17. Others have waived sort of some of the occupational safety issues as long as they're under supervision in an apprenticeship program. John, I'm wondering if the state of California is doing anything in that space yet.
They can participate in an apprenticeship as a 16 or 17-year-old. Because of that supervision component and the mentoring, In certain areas in manufacturing or construction, it's a little more difficult, but generally we can find a solution to that, including addressing the employer of record situation through the Foundation for California Community Colleges, as well as work experience education, ed code. There's a lot of ways to work through that if we need to.
Okay, great. But at the beginning of yours, you got cut off. You did say they can work in apprenticeships at 16 or 17 years old. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, and Rebecca, one last question for you before we have to go, and that's, you're focused on, you're part of the HCAP system, does some great work across the country, but you're focused largely on incumbent workers, which I think is a great use of apprenticeship as a way to sort of, lift entry-level workers and advance them. I think that has a huge role in equity by doing that. So I'm just wondering if there's any last observations about, people think apprenticeship is new workers or young workers. You're using it for incumbent workers. I just would love your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, in a lot of our programs, what we find is that there's real opportunities to do both and actually have them complement each other. So, we've done programs that are jointly sort of community members as well as incumbent workers, and part of that is when we're trying to fill jobs in a particular area, like San Francisco, where it's hard to recruit people into medical assistant, for example. But one of the things I think is really key here is just thinking broadly about the talent pipeline and how we create career opportunities for folks that includes kind of a wide entry point with ongoing advancement. And so my view really strongly is that we need to be partnering with youth apprenticeship. We need to be figuring out how, we're becoming a regular part of the education and training and job placement system so that folks are coming in at the entry level and they're not stopping there. They're continuing to advance through incumbent worker training. That I think healthcare is a great industry to look at doing that. Great.
Thank you, Rebecca. Look, we're going to have to wrap up, but before I do so, we got an interesting question about business buy-in. And I would say, apprenticeship doesn't happen without employer and business buy-in and interest. There's a lot of education and persistence that's needed with employers. Sometimes it takes, months, a year to get to an employer to say yes. I think, Lauren, in your quest, it took you for a while to learn all about apprenticeship and how you could use it, for example. And so, my advice, I think our advice is to be persistent with employers, educate them about how apprenticeship really works. There's some great models across the country at the secondary and post-secondary level that you can go to. There's great models in California that any of us on the phone can direct you to. Certainly John Dunn knows them, and Vinz knows many of them. So, business buy-in is an essential thing to do, and there's a lot of education and persistence that has to happen with the business community. I want to thank Vinz Koller with SPRA. I want to thank Rebecca with the Education Fund. Lauren Fernandez with SAP, really taking a risk out there in Silicon Valley. That's excellent. Fran, you've done a great job. Thanks for JFF. I'll be talking to you tomorrow. And who didn't I get? John Dunn with the California Labor and Workforce Agency. So, look, thanks for joining us. We hope to be doing more work out in California. We'd love to stay in touch with you. Those of you who are still on the call, go to our Center for Apprenticeship website at JFF and sign up on our mailing list. And we'll send you some quarterly updates and some national information, policy information on what's going on around the country in apprenticeship. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.